played Esper Deathblade, locked under Blood Moon, although he actually has some basic lands this time.
This time he has some, yeah, he has some lands. We have seen him lose that. So quite the board. We have a Humility in play. We have, so everything's a 1/1, which is going to stop any sort of Painter Servant Grindstone going on from Greg Smith. We have, one of them has an Umezawa's Jete. We're going to see where Rudy goes from here. This is a Thopter Foundry. So Rudy's Shardless Bug deck, if you haven't seen it, it is playing, I had a chance to look at it earlier. So quite the interesting brew he has. It's Shardless Agent into Stoneforge Mystic, and he also plays Thopter Sword.
Yeah, so we've seen some derivatives of this kind of deck where Thopter Sword is woven into a kind of traditional shell. Rudy also with Ancestral Visions plus Shardless Agent, so a super controlling deck. So definitely an interesting deck here.
Yeah, so see, Humility certainly changes the entire equation here. So looking at Greg's deck, as with most Painter decks, he has a couple ways to kind of get the game right now, but he already has the Blood Moon down. That's not getting there. He can't Painter Grindstone because of this Humility. I'm trying to think, how does Greg win from this spot?
Well, he can, if Ensnaring Bridge locks Rudy for long enough, he can just win by manual Grindstone.
All right, yeah, he can win for sure by manual Grindstone. As you see here, this Ensnaring Bridge doing a lot of work on Greg's side.
We had Greg on camera earlier. He's done just a lot of work with Ensnaring Bridge so far in this tournament. 2 in his main deck, I believe. 2 more copies in his sideboard. And a really powerful element of this deck.
So yeah, you talked about manual Grindstone. That's just something we typically do not see in Legacy. Normally when it's activated, it wins the game. But the card does not always just mill their entire deck with Painter Servant. We'll get it.
Now there is a Pithy Needle in play for Rudy, so it's possible that Needle is set to Grindstone already, in which case matters are much more complicated for Greg.
In which case the game is just really slow. But as you see here, Grindstone is also a millstone. You can just use it 3 and tap to mill 2.
Yeah, and that Pithy Needle is set.
So the Pithy Needle's on Grindstone. I don't believe there is any artifact destruction in Greg's deck either. If there wasn't a Humility in play, he could weld it out, but there is a Humility in play, so none of his creatures are going to do anything. And I really think it's whose deck has more cards in it right now. You know, can Rudy win before he manually mills out first?
Yeah, I gotta take a look here at Rudy's list to see if there's any way to get out of an Ensnaring Bridge. There appears to be 1 copy of Detention Sphere, so that's a thing. He has a Council's Judgment, a Seal Primordial. Okay, so he has some outs to Ensnaring Bridge. He's not just locked here.
Yeah, second Ensnaring Bridge is Force of Willed by Rudy. In fact, if he has all things, not only is he not just dead here, he almost, I would say, has a forced win. It's just when is it going to happen?
Yeah, depending on if Greg can break out of other elements, you know, if he can Manic Vandal the Pithy Needle, then, or I guess Humility is in play too, so that isn't even
That doesn't work, yeah. He has, I don't know how Greg gets out of this. If Rudy has removal for the Ensnaring Bridge.
Here's the issue, is I've watched Greg play a lot and have often said, I don't know how he gets out of this, and then gets out of this. So I don't want to assume that the man is dead because I've just seen too much happen already.
Yeah, I'm not saying I know it's that. I'm just saying I don't see it. But I'd love to see him do it.
I guess he can win with Chandra.
He could ping Rudy 13 times.
Chandra's an out.
That is an out. All right. I mean, that's not even that unrealistic to say he could ping him 13 times. The game is going at a pace where that's not unreasonable. But it looks like Rudy does have, he is floating a Force of Will on top of his deck, so should have an answer to anything that Greg tries.
And it's just not clear how many more meaningful spells Greg has access to in the deck, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it's what an interesting situation. So Rudy here, he has Jace the Mind Sculptor in hand. He could use this to win also. I believe he could +2 the Jace. Well, no, sorry, he doesn't have double blue. He just can't cast it. Jace is just an extra blue card. As there are 2 islands in Rudy's deck. So if Rudy finds the 2nd island, he could cast Jace. But he's going to go ahead and for Seal of Primordium, he's going to hit that Ensnaring Bridge.
And now the floodgates are open.
Yeah, now things are about to happen. Rudy's going to go ahead and Swords, the Magus of the Moon, and here comes the team. It is a Thopter, a Stoneforge Mystic, 2 Shardless Agents, and most importantly, 1 Shardless Agent with a GT on it.
But everything's a 1/1.
Everything's 1/1. Makes combat math real easy. He goes ahead and pumps the Shardless Agent. So, okay, that agent was not blocked. So Greg trading 2 creatures for 2 creatures. It looks like Rudy double pumped to deal 5 this turn.
Yeah.
But the question is, how does Greg make this stop?
And again, he can't really shovel his deck either, so he's top locked to some extent. His grindstones are shut up by the needle. All his creatures are shut off by humility.
I do find some justice that the Imperial Painter is losing to the fact that there's an enchantment on the board that just colds his whole deck.
Yeah, there is something nice about that.
Yeah, you really can't feel that bad for him. You see here, Rudy topping again. He has an Enlightened Tutor. He could use that to get his Detention Sphere if he needed to.
He also has access to Force of Will that he can draw with the Divining Top and pitch. He has a Meddling Mage and adjacent hand, so.
All right, Meddling Mage, remember that's a 1/1.
I think that if I was Rudy here, I probably would name, I guess, Volcanic Fallout, but
yeah,
doesn't really matter very much.
All right, and the game will go ahead and go for Rudy Briksza. So we are on to game 3.
Greg Smith, our St. Louis Legacy Open champion. We had him on camera in round 5. Rudy Briksza, Central New Jersey native, one of our top Open Series players. You see him with the number 23 next to his name. Made the drive out to Columbus here. Really a fan of control decks in general in Legacy. We've seen him play Esper Deathblade a lot. You see him play Stoneforge Mystic decks all the time. This is a very different take.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So yeah, he plays a lot of Deathblade. This isn't exactly a Deathblade deck. It's definitely a hybrid of Shardless Bug and Deathblade. I think to me it's still, I would say, feels more like a Deathblade deck than a Shardless Bug deck, just because it's using more of the blue disruption package than the black one, but it's really hard to say.
It's just a deck of stuff. It's a deck of value and a lot of odd one-ofs here. There's 1 Enlightened Tutor, so that glues some of it together, but it's just a deck of stuff. And Rudy just likes playing with individually powerful things.
Yeah, this deck, one thing you can say about it, there's no shortage of powerful cards in it.
Yes, it's all good stuff.
Remember, both these players sitting at 6-0 right now. Winner will move to 7-0 and have a chance to be one of our undefeated players on day 1.
Greg Smith, one of the players that I watch that impresses me the most on the Open Series. Just expert level play with his deck. Not a lot of standard Open success, but just a consistent performer in Legacy, and it's not hard to understand why.
Yeah, that's interesting because most people, when you think of Imperial Painter, you don't think of, what are the highest skill cap decks in Legacy? Generally Painter is not up at the top there, but if you said he still pilots it very well.
In terms of approaching matchups, I think that's true. It's not necessarily the highest skill cap, but in terms of understanding the operations, there's so many opportunities for small pieces of value or to establish certain combinations of cards that make it really hard for your opponent to play their reactive cards effectively, and knowing those tricks is really important to playing the deck.
We are on to a game 3, so we'll see where we go here. It does look like Greg is still just cold to humility for the most part.
It is not an easy card for him to play against. That is certainly true.
If there's a humility in play, he doesn't have a way to combo out anymore, it doesn't look like.
Yeah, he just has to kind of win manual style, either attacking with 1/1s or locking Rudy out somehow and winning with grindstone activations. Neither of which are very easy to do.
Fortunately for him, there's only 1 humility in Rudy's deck. Rudy does play a package where he has Enlightened Tutors, however, to go find that. He has 1, it's just actually not Enlightened Tutors, with Enlightened Tutor, singular.
He has 1.
Okay.
Because 1 in his main deck. And that allows him to do the Thopter Sword thing, get a Detention Sphere. There's even an Ensnaring Bridge in his own main deck that he has access to as kind of a cheap, free way to win against certain decks.
Yeah, and as long as Greg hasn't gotten a Blood Moon down already, then Rudy can go ahead and Enlightened Tutor for humility, and that kind of can be his game win.
Yeah.
Now, for basics, Rudy has 2 islands, but only 1 forest, 1 plain. So once Blood Moon's down, that line's out.
Rudy has historically played a lot of decks that are soft to the card Blood Moon. We've had him on camera get locked in New Jersey. Yeah, turn 2 once or something like that. This deck, not great against the card, but at least has a little bit of game.
Yeah, Imperial Painter, one of those decks also that really abuses the advantage of being on the play.
Oh, for sure. 2-mana land plus, any sort of 2-mana land, Simian Spirit Guide type of deck is all about being on the play.
All right, if you look at Greg Smith's hand, 3 basic mountains, Imperial Recruiter. Does he have the thing to... He needs a card to jam. Looks like 4 basic mountains. Jaya Ballard. 2 recruiters.
It is not a powerful hand.
Yeah.
And I like this mulligan a lot from Greg. It's not like a mulligan on the surface, like I can't cast my spells, but it's a mulligan insofar as if Rudy has any sort of hand, I'm not going to win this game.
Yeah, I mean, so, right, the advantage to Painter is you are really proactive, really fast. You play these high variance cards, but there's not a good proactive game plan in that hand. Your game plan is to go get Painter Servant, I suppose. And yeah, it's not actually doing anything. You could curve it into Magus of the Moon. You could hope that works.
Okay.
But turn 3 Magus doesn't seem like it would get there against a Shardless Band deck.
I have been alerted / reminded just now that Painter Servant actually does work through Humility. I do not know why this is the case, but I remember that this is a rule.
Humility is a confusing card.
One of the, again, one of the many confusing wrinkles about the card Humility. So, whatever, that's a thing.
We did have another one with Humility and Meddling Mage. You still name the card off Meddling Mage, and they can play the card, but there's a card is named so that if the Humility were to go away, the Mage is still meddling something. And all right, Greg keeps a 6, plays a turn 1 Blood Moon. Rudy could not Force of Will it faster.
Yeah. You gotta like that mulligan at 6 by Greg here. He found the kind of thing he was looking for. You look at Rudy's hand, not a hand that can function against that card, although he did have a basic planes, but he did have Force of Will to protect himself, and now Greg's in a lot of trouble.
The question is, does Greg's hand have anything else in it, or was that it?
He has a Welder, which does nothing. He has a couple mountains that he's loath to play because his first land was City of Traders, and so he's going to be waiting for a while.
What a weird deck. You have lands, and you... Yeah. Well, plan A didn't work. Okay. Well, Rudy's going to have a turn 2 Meddling Mage. We'll see what he names there. May just go for Blood Moon again. Wouldn't be surprised. All right, well, he's hedging this time. He's going to go for Magus the Moon instead of Blood Moon. And Greg's going to make move number 2. He taps for 2 and plays a mountain, sacks the City of Traders, and he's going to go ahead and Lightning Bolt the Meddling Mage. 2 colorless does nothing. And now we see why Rudy named Magus. It was because he had Seal for the possible Blood Moon. And Goblin Welder added to the table for Greg Smith.
And all Rudy is trying to do is find any sort of creature here. He has a ton of insurance against Greg doing anything powerful here, but...
Yeah, he has Detention Sphere and Force of Will as his last 2 cards, and play a Seal Primordium and an Umezawa's Jitte. However, Greg is at the ready with this Red Elemental Blast. If Greg can find one of his all-in cards, he could win this counter war.
For sure.
You see Jaya Ballard hang out in his hand, and there's Magus of the Moon for Greg. And now Rudy has a creature for the Jitte. It is Shardless Agent into Path Exile. Rudy's going to go ahead and Path Goblin Welder. I think that actually helps Greg.
I would not have passed that Welder. Greg's deck is full of 3-mana cards. He's doing nothing and saying go here. And yeah, I think Rudy might have just done it out of instinct here. I have Path, I want to cast it, but I think Greg is happy to trade in that Welder for a mountain right now. Yeah,
not to mention that starting next turn, Rudy can just kill it with the Jitte.
Yeah.
I suppose if Greg kills the Shardless Agent, then Greg could weld the agent in and get rid of the Jitte. I don't actually think Rudy cares.
Right.
It would be a cute play, I suppose. But now Greg doesn't have enough mana to play Jaya Ballard. The question is whether or not he'll be able to do much through this Force of Will. It looks like Shardless Agent is going to get Jitte counters. And we see Manic Vandal for Greg. Rudy's going to force, and Greg with the answer. Wow, he's going to go ahead and Red Blast.
Great sequence here, obviously, for Greg. And keep in mind, he has Magus of the Moon in hand. So if Rudy doesn't draw anything of significance next turn, he might start getting into some real trouble.
Well, he'll be stuck on white mana for the game, which fortunately is the correct color for him to get rid of a Magus. But, I have to drive back to it. This is Rudy. I think you're right, did the snap gut play of pathing the Goblin Welder, and I think he paid the price for it right there.
Yeah, Greg cannot do the sequence with 4 mana. And Misty Rainforest is another really big draw there for Rudy. This allows him to go get another basic in response and maybe play a functional game plan. A lot of his deck is still shut off here. He can't cast, he can't cast Humility, chase the Mind Sculptor, what have you, but...
Or any of the green cards. So now he has a Plains, an Island, and all Mountains as the Magus of the Moon resolves for Greg.
And this is another, Greg Mulligan, he got his Blood of the Moon stopped. He was on Stadium Traders, and he's still just finding some way to plug his way back into this game. It's incredible.
Yeah, having the discipline of when to sack that City of Traders. Yeah, there's just a lot of micro decisions in this deck. And what a draw for Greg.
It's a really good draw. It's just more pressure here.
It's going to be Chandra Pyromaster. She is a one of, I believe, in his deck. Absolutely. She's going to plus up to 5, pinging Rudy for 1. Rudy has the path, or the Swords to Plowshares for Magus of the Moon. He's choosing not to do it right now. So he's going to play Stoneforge Mystic, going ahead and getting what I think is going to be Batterskull. And it is.
And this is going to allow Rudy next turn to Swords and unlock his whole hand. And often these Imperial Planner lists have kind of like one random Planeswalker in them. This time it's Chandra. We've seen Koth in this slot before. I bet Greg wishes this was Koth in this spot.
Well, do you think, I'm not sure he could kill him fast enough with Koth. They'd be close, though. Chandra lets him maybe, if he can Chandra 0 into a Painter Servant, then he's great.
Sure.
Because then I believe he has another Red Blast of some sort in his hand. Whether Red Blast or Pyroblast. He has Pyroblast.
Yeah, he has the option right here to just 0 Chandra, and he can cast anything he finds at this point.
Yeah, this whole deck is 3 or less, outside of the Chandra, which is already in play.
So Rudy with some critical draws here. That Misty Rainforest a few turns ago, now the Stoneforge Mystic, was looking like he was at risk of just kind of getting locked out of the game, but he's right back in it.
And there's also, I believe, a Jaya Ballard in Greg's hand. This is Mountain, Jaya, and Red Blast. If he can find a way to turn things blue, he's great. But as it is, that Batterskull is going to be a beating.
Although he's got a lot of tools, keep in mind the Chandra plussing makes Batterskull unable to block. And that combined with Jaya actually finishes off a Germ token. So Greg has some elements of being able to race here.
All right, so Greg's going for a different planner. He actually said no blocks on the Stoneforge Mystic, hit Rudy down to 9 and played Jaya.
And I think this might just be all about the play next turn of trying to set up a Chandra ping plus a Jaya activation on the Germ.
Right, because Chandra can incinerate as well. But Rudy at the ready with Swords to Plowshares is going to take care of Jaya. Greg goes up to 22. We see he drew another Stoneforge Mystic, but he's going to go ahead and hard cast this Batterskull.
Big swing in the race here. And Greg without his Manic Vandal at this point, or I believe there's only the one copy in his list. Yeah, he has one in the sideboard, so it's going to be tough.
Rudy uses Stoneforge Mystic to hit for 1. Now, he had opted there to that 1 damage. You have to hard cast the Batterskull so he could get the 1 damage in as opposed to leaving up 3 to save it. He seems pretty worried about Chandra going ultimate, is what my read on that would be.
Yeah.
Though I'm not actually sure how bad it is if she goes ultimate in this matchup.
There's nothing to really be done here. You see Greg.
And Greg, he drew the Painter Servant. And this is huge. He draws the Painter Servant. He goes for the Pyroblast. It's not going to work, however, because Rudy goes ahead and Seal Primordiums the Painter Servant in response.
And that is curious because you can actually just play the Painter Servant there and sit on your hands. You don't have to move there if you're Greg.
Yeah, I mean, your Chandra will start taking hits from Batterskull.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad, but you might be able to get Rudy to make a mistake there and just seal the Painter Servant out of habit, and then you have an opportunity to take out the Batterskull.
Yeah, a slight misstep there on Greg's side.
I mean, it may be a calculated risk, right? Because if you just go ahead and, let Rudy untap, maybe his Batterskull is never shields down. If you think maybe he'll miss the seal in play.
Your best bet is to just go for it and hope he misses.
Yeah, maybe Greg's in that kind of spot.
Things are dire. Wouldn't be surprised if they were, as we see Sword of the Meek fetched up for Rudy. This was with Stoneforge Mystic. and it's going to be equipped to Stoneforge.
I think Rudy has Thopter Foundry in hand as well.
I believe you're right.
He has all the pieces.
One thing that Greg does have going for him is now that Rudy's seal is down, he can get Painter Grindstone. Greg's going to have to just draw it, but it could work.
Yes. He had no Jitte in play, so Rudy is defenseless from running draws.
And we'll see what Greg decides to do.
And Rudy has found Force of Will, and so right now I'm not casting. There's some risk here. I think
he's casting it. Yeah, I agree. I think you can't lose on the board. You should hang on to your blue spells.
I don't think it really appreciably increases his clock.
Let me see. We'll see if he pays the price for it. Grindstone the draw from Greg. If Greg, next turn, top decks Painter Servant.
And keep in mind, Rudy can't hard cast the Force of Will in hand because that Magus is still in play. And so unless he finds a blue card here or an island, he's in potentially some real trouble.
Well, yeah, he opens up a top deck for Greg. And a lot of damage coming in. Not lethal damage, but a good chunk. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 damage. He's going to cast top. See if he finds that blue card. It's land. There we go. Meddling Mage and Charlotte's Agent. That should protect Rudy from anything that Greg can do.
Well, it gets a little awkward here because of the Grindstone in play. Greg gets to just use this at the end of the turn.
Oh, and Rudy put both blue cards on top and put a land third down.
Yeah.
So if Greg just does the milieu for the Millstone Grindstone right now, he'll actually get Rudy's top 2 cards. But it looks like he did not find.
I think that's an Imperial Recruiter, though.
Yeah, but Rudy has the counter. So he had to go for the blind mill too on the end step there, I believe. I mean, that would also predicate that Rudy doesn't find another blue card in the next 2. I mean, there's a lot going on that.
It still feels like Rudy has got himself in a position where there was a little bit of a risk, but Greg can't find it, and that's it.
All right, so Rudy Briksza up to 7-0, 1 match away from a perfect day 1 as he defeats Greg Smith 2 games to 1.
And Rudy definitely saved in this round, in contrast to how he plays in tournaments usually, by having a couple basic lands in his deck. You know, we've seen him shut out by Blood Moon before. This time, the plains and the island were a huge part of him being able to take that match. He also had a pretty solid